Welcome to the deep dive. We're really glad to have you with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thrilled to be here and jump into this.
So if you're joining us today, you are likely, that specific type of curious learner. You're the kind of person who really wants to understand the why behind how things work.
Right, but you probably don't want to be buried under some massive avalanche of dry information.
Exactly. You want the real insights, the ones that actually make a difference. And today we are looking at a topic that touches literally every single one of us, but from an angle that it might completely change how you view it.
It definitely changed my perspective when I first started digging into these sources.
We are diving into a really fascinating set of sources analyzing the psychology of money. And the core premise of our material today is, it's a bit of a paradox.
Big one.
It's this idea that perfectly logical, mathematically sound financial advice often feels completely and utterly useless in real life.
Yeah, you can read the same perfectly correct advice 10 times, understand the math behind it completely, and still feel entirely stuck.
Right.
It's a phenomenal contradiction, and it's something so many people wrestle with silently. When you hear standard financial advice and it doesn't work for your specific situation, the immediate instinct is to just internalize that failure.
You think it's your fault.
Exactly. You assume you aren't trying hard enough or, you lack willpower. What the source material does beautifully is point out that if a piece of advice feels like it was written for someone living on a totally different planet,
Which it often does.
right, that isn't resistance or denial on your part. That is recognition of a flawed system.
And that is our mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack the hidden disconnect between textbook money advice and your lived reality. We want to explore why failing to follow this advice is not a personal failure at all, but a fundamental flaw in the advice itself.
Which is such a freeing concept.
It really is. Okay, let's unpack this. I was reading through the material and I kept getting stuck on this one specific word the authors use: margin.
Ah, yes. Margin.
It seems like all standard financial advice hinges entirely on this one concept. How are they defining that in this context?
Margin is the foundational yet completely unspoken assumption behind almost all mainstream financial advice. By margin, we just mean extra room in your life.
Room in the budget, right.
Yes. The advice assumes you have margin in your budget, meaning after you pay for your rent, your food, utilities, just basic survival, there is a little bit of money left over.
Even if it's small.
Exactly. It might be $20, might be $200. But there is some slack in the system. Beyond just money, though, it assumes you have margin in your schedule and margin in your mental energy.
So let's look at the standard advice we hear everywhere. We've all heard it 100 times. Spend less than you earn.
Build a 6-month emergency fund.
Invest early. Track every single dollar. Cut unnecessary expenses. Oh, and open tax-advantaged investment accounts, which, for anyone unfamiliar, just means accounts where the government gives you a tax break, like an IRA or a 401k.
Right, to encourage you to save for retirement.
Right. Now, the math of all this advice is bulletproof. If you do these things, your bank account will grow. But you're saying this advice falls apart because it assumes you actually have the time and energy to execute it.
Yeah, think about the person writing that advice. They usually have an abundance of margin. In fact, they've probably had margin for so long that they have completely forgotten what it feels like to live without it.
They're out of touch with the reality on the ground.
Completely. When they look at a financial problem, they view it entirely through the lens of optimization. They ask, how can we make better use of the resources that are already here?
They assume there's something to optimize in the first place.
Yes. They assume you have the time to, meal prep on a Sunday instead of grabbing fast food between your two jobs. They assume you have the mental bandwidth to sit on hold for an hour to negotiate better car insurance rates.
But wait, let me push back on that a little bit. Isn't budgeting essentially just math? Regardless of whether you have extra time or mental energy, the math is still the math. If you don't optimize, you just lose money.
Right, optimization is only a useful tool when there's actually slack in the system to optimize. The material contrasts having margin with living at what they call full capacity.
Full capacity.
Right. Living at full capacity means every single dollar has a job before you even earn it. It is already spoken for by the rent, the absolute cheapest groceries you can find, the minimum payments on a credit card, the gas required to drive to work.
There's literally nothing left.
Nothing. There are no wants to cut out. You are entirely consumed by covering needs. And the needs take absolutely everything. For someone at full capacity, the math isn't about saving 10%. The cold, unforgiving math is simply you have $1,000 coming in and you have $1,200 of essential bills going out.
So no amount of clever budgeting apps or optimization tactics can change a fundamental lack of resources.
Exactly. You can't optimize zero.
That makes the reality of the situation so much clearer. And the text gives this incredibly relatable dilemma to illustrate living at full capacity. Let's imagine a person going about their life on a random Tuesday.
A completely ordinary day.
Right. They're sitting at the kitchen table asking themselves, do I fix the car so I can safely get to work, or do I pay the electric bill so the lights stay on?
Or do I buy my kid the new shoes they desperately need, or do I try to stretch the old ones for just one more month?
What's fascinating here is, wait, I stole your line.
I'll take it back. What's fascinating here is that traditional financial advice has absolutely nothing to say to the person at that kitchen table.
Nothing at all.
The advice to cut out your daily latte is frankly insulting to someone debating between electricity and transportation.
Which brings up the whole clash between financial systems and messy reality. The text mentions several popular systems that people are constantly told to use.
Like the 50-30-20 rule.
Right, the 50-30-20 rule, which dictates that 50% of your income goes to needs, 30% to wants, and 20% to savings. Or there's the envelope method,
Where you literally put physical cash into different envelopes labeled for groceries, gas, rent.
and when the envelope is empty, you stop spending.
Which looks brilliant on a spreadsheet.
They do. On paper, it's perfect.
Because systems are built on pure logic and predictability. They rely on the idea that if you input the correct variables into your spreadsheet, you will get the correct output.
But life isn't a spreadsheet.
Not at all. Human life is incredibly unpredictable and heavily emotional. Let's take that person at the kitchen table on a Tuesday. Let's say they're trying their hardest to follow the 50-30-20 rule. They have their budget perfectly balanced.
And then life happens.
Life happens. Their car gets a flat tire the exact same week their child suddenly needs prescription glasses.
The spreadsheet didn't account for the flat tire.
Or the glasses. Systems don't account for the anxiety that wakes you up at 3 in the morning wondering how you're going to survive the next 2 weeks.
I see that, but let's take a really specific piece of advice. Track every single expense.
Okay.
The logic is that you cannot manage what you do not measure. If you're living at full capacity and running out of money, wouldn't tracking your expenses be the most important thing you could possibly do? You need to know exactly where the leak is.
For someone with margin, tracking expenses feels empowering. It provides a sense of control. But consider the psychology of the person with absolutely no margin.
It's a different experience.
Completely different. For them, tracking expenses forces them to confront exactly how little they have, how much they owe, and how far behind they are falling every single day.
Wow.
It means staring directly at the terrifying reality they have been actively trying to push out of their mind just so they have the energy to get out of bed and go to work.
So it's actively harmful.
For that person, opening a budgeting app isn't empowering. It is emotionally devastating. It confirms their worst fears. The advice is identical, but the emotional impact is completely inverted based on the person's reality.
That is profound difference in perspective. It completely changes how we should evaluate advice, and it applies perfectly to how we talk about paying off debt, too.
Oh, absolutely. The classic debt debate.
Right. There are two main strategies you always hear about. The first is the debt avalanche, where you put all your extra money toward the debt with the highest interest rate.
And the second is the debt snowball, where you ignore the interest rates entirely and pay off your smallest balance first.
Let me challenge the source material on this. If I have a credit card charging me 25% interest, mathematically, I have to pay that off first. Why would anyone ever suggest paying off a smaller, lower interest loan? You are literally just throwing away money on interest.
Mathematically, yes, the avalanche method is superior. You will pay less over the long term. But remember, we are dealing with human psychology, not just calculators.
Right, the emotional side.
Exactly. The source material argues that paying off a small, lower interest debt first might actually be the better move because it provides a much-needed psychological win.
Momentum.
Yes. When you're buried in debt, you feel hopeless. Crossing one entire debt off your list, even a really small one, gives you a sense of progress. It proves to you that you can actually do this.
And that emotional momentum keeps you going.
That emotional momentum might be worth far more to your overall success than the $200 you would have saved in interest over 3 years using the avalanche method. Money is not just an optimization problem. For the vast majority of people, money is a stress problem. And stress needs relief, not optimization.
Stress needs relief, not optimization. That is a brilliant way to frame it, and it sets up the sheer physical and mental toll of this situation. Financial stress is not just numbers on a screen. It is a massive cognitive load.
It really is.
For anyone unfamiliar with that term, cognitive load essentially refers to your brain's processing power. Think of it like a background app running on your phone that is constantly draining your battery to zero.
That's a great analogy.
When you have no margin, you're walking down the grocery aisle constantly calculating, can I afford this generic brand of cereal? If I buy this, what happens if gas prices go up tomorrow? Every tiny purchase requires immense mental processing.
And that energy drains you physically. It creates a constant low-grade terror of making one wrong move. Because when you have zero margin, mistakes aren't just minor inconveniences, they are catastrophic.
They ripple out.
They do. Let's go back to our person with the flat tire. The source material outlines how these events cause a terrifying cascade effect. It is never just a flat tire.
Right. It triggers everything else.
Because they have to pay to fix the tire to get to work, they don't have enough money in their checking account when their phone bill auto-drafts. The phone company charges a late fee.
And then the bank gets involved.
Right. The bank sees the overdrawn account and hits them with a $35 overdraft fee. Suddenly, because they ran over a nail in the road, they are $70 deeper in the hole than they were last week.
The stakes are impossibly high.
Which means their nervous system can never, ever relax.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We have to talk about the issue of timing, because this is a variable that financial advice completely ignores.
Timing is huge.
The text brings up the classic rule: invest early and let compound interest work for you. If you hear that at 23, fresh out of college, that advice is a roadmap to wealth. You have a massive runway of time ahead of you.
It's pure potential.
But what happens when you hear that exact same advice at 45, after 2 decades of just barely surviving the cascade of flat tires and overdraft fees?
At 45, that advice ceases to be helpful. It transforms into a glaring reminder of time you can never get back.
It just hurts to hear.
It highlights the opportunities you didn't have and the path you couldn't take because you're simply too busy surviving. The advice itself hasn't changed a single word, but your circumstances have entirely altered its meaning.
And the same logic applies to the build a 6-month emergency fund rule. If you are in a stable season of life with a good income, maybe saving that much is difficult, but it's an achievable goal.
You can work toward it.
But if you are currently in pure survival mode, if you are genuinely one missed paycheck away from eviction today, building a 6-month emergency fund is a complete fantasy.
It might as well be advice on how to build a spaceship.
Exactly. The glaring issue is that financial advice does not come with a timestamp or a context warning. It presents itself as a universal law of nature. So when it doesn't work for you, the natural assumption is that you are the broken variable in the equation.
And that specific assumption kicks off the most dangerous phase of this entire dynamic, the cycle of shame.
The shame cycle is brutal.
It is a totally predictable progression. You hear the advice, you understand the logic, and you try your absolute hardest to implement it. But because the advice requires margin you do not have, it fails.
So you think you need more knowledge.
Right. You assume you just need more education, so you read another book, you try a new spreadsheet, and you fail again. Eventually, you stop blaming the spreadsheet and you start blaming yourself.
You start looking around and thinking, everyone else seems to be managing this just fine. Why can't I? If I just had more discipline, or if I wasn't so weak, I could figure this out.
You take a practical problem, the literal absence of enough currency to meet your needs, and you internalize it into an identity problem. You start believing that you are fundamentally irresponsible.
And that changes everything.
When failing to follow financial advice turns into a judgment of your character, shame takes over completely. And shame is a paralyzing emotion. It doesn't motivate you to hustle harder. It makes you want to hide.
You just shut down.
You stop trying to budget at all because trying just guarantees another painful encounter with your perceived inadequacy. You stop opening your mail. You stop checking your bank balance because every interaction with your finances is just a reminder of your failure.
But let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Mm-hmm.
If we say the advice is broken, it's not your fault, aren't we just letting people off the hook? Doesn't personal responsibility have to matter at some point? If we blame the lack of margin, do people just give up and say, well, there's nothing I can do?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is crucial to understand that the source material is not promoting an anti-discipline message. It is not giving anyone permission to ignore their finances or avoid making difficult choices. What it is promoting is an anti-oversimplification message.
That's a great distinction.
There is a version of personal responsibility that is honest and incredibly helpful. It acknowledges your agency and says your choices do matter. But there is another version of personal responsibility that is entirely devoid of empathy. It ignores the weight of circumstance, ignores the cognitive load, and assumes everyone is starting a marathon from the exact same starting line with the exact same shoes.
So what does this all mean? It means that true responsibility requires you to understand what you are actually in control of, and just as importantly, to recognize the massive constraints that are entirely beyond your control.
Yes.
Simply pointing at a person's lack of resources and telling them to try harder isn't promoting responsibility, it's just assigning blame.
Precisely. The ultimate antidote to this cycle of shame is clarity. Understanding the psychology of why money is so hard for you is almost always more valuable than just being handed a new list of what to do next.
You have to see the whole board.
When you finally recognize the real forces at play, the lack of margin, the draining cognitive load, the timing mismatch, the cascade of fees, the pressure begins to lift. You stop fighting your own character while you are also trying to fight your economic reality.
The clarity replaces the shame.
Clarity, rather than guilt, creates the necessary mental space for real behavioral change. It allows you to look at your bank account and say, I am in a difficult situation, but I am not a bad person.
That is a remarkably powerful realization. To summarize the core takeaway from this deep dive for you listening right now, if textbook financial advice has always felt totally useless to you, it is not because you are lazy, resistant, or broken.
Not at all.
It's because that advice is attempting to solve a deeply human, messy, stress-based problem using cold mathematical optimization. The failure is not yours. The failure is in the advice's complete inability to see the reality of your daily life.
It just doesn't factor you in.
When you are living at full capacity without any margin and dealing with the constant physical exhaustion of financial stress, pure logic just doesn't translate. Give yourself some grace. Understand that you are responding to immense pressure, and a spreadsheet simply cannot fix a lack of resources.
This raises an important question, though, a thought to perhaps leave you with as we wrap up our analysis today.
I'd love to hear it.
We've established that financial stress is fundamentally a physical and cognitive load. It literally lives in your body, ruins your sleep, and exhausts your mental processing power.
Right, it's a physical reality.
If that is true, how much of what we treat as purely medical or mental health crises in our society are actually disguised financial crises? And if we stopped looking at individual financial strain as a personal math problem to be solved by better budgeting and started treating it as a literal public health issue, how radically would that change the way we design our support systems?
That is a truly profound thought to end on, and definitely something for you to mull over today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this exploration provided you with some clarity and perhaps lifted a bit of that heavy weight off your shoulders.
It's been a great conversation.
Keep questioning the advice you hear. Keep seeking to understand the why behind the systems around you. And remember to give yourself a bit of grace when the textbook math doesn't easily map onto your real life. We will see you next time.